my name is Stella, and this is the first episode of my Fiber Arts podcast. I'm going to be talking about my finished projects, my work in progress, and what my plans for the next few weeks are. I just made myself some hot chocolate. I recently learned how to froth milk in a French press, so now it has this comfy, smooth texture. And I suggest you also grab yourself a hot drink, maybe something to knit on, and let's look at what I've been working on. The first finished object I would like to talk about is this self-drafted raglan sweater that I finally finished this week because it has been on my needles for over half a year. It was the first ever sweater I casted on to knit, and it is made out of 8 skeins of Drops Melody, which is a 71% alpaca, 25% wool, and 4% polyamide mix. And I used 2 of each of the colors: marzipan, light sea green, light blue, and dark jeans blue. I knit this on 6mm needles, and I did the ribbing on 4.5mm needles. As I said, this was the first sweater I ever tried to make, so it was quite the adventure to also self-draft it. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea. I had been crocheting for quite some years before I started knitting, so I was kind of familiar with how things are constructed, but I had never really worked with patterns very much. If anything, I looked at YouTube tutorials or video tutorials in general. I didn't really like to look at written patterns, so that was a little intimidating to me, and I thought it would be easier to just figure it out as I go, which I think it wasn't easier, but I'm definitely so glad and very proud that I managed to do that. For inspiration, I mainly used 2 sources, which were the How to Knit a Raglan Sweater video tutorial by Kate Beats and the Step-by-Step Sweater Pattern by Florence Miller. I looked at both of those, worked through them, and kind of figured out how to construct a raglan sweater and what to pay attention to, and then just went my own route with that. And there was a lot of trial and error and knitting and frogging back and starting over. So yeah, it definitely took me a very long time, and it was also on the back burner for a while over Christmas, when I did a lot of gift knits and just started to learn how to knit on other items. For me, the most fun part of making something myself is usually figuring out how it's done. So I quite like self-drafting. It's what I mostly do. However, now I have a little more experience with patterns. I also know how to find them better, so I think I will be knitting some more pre-made patterns in the future, because there are quite a few designs I would like to try out. This sweater is riddled with problems, really. As I said, at the time when I started knitting it, I didn't have a lot of experience in knitting, so the ribbing was already confusing to me. I started on the neck and I did the ribbing, I miscounted, I twisted my stitches. I think I started the ribbing 3 times, and since this yarn has an alpaca and wool halo, it felts together a tiny bit, so when you knit it in ribbing, it kind of gets so tangled up in each other that it was very hard to frog back once it had been knitted. It was fine for the stockinette parts, but I still have the neck opening laying around somewhere in my scrap yarn, but completely finished in ribbing because I just can't frog it. It's just too tangled. So that's important to keep in mind for later. But yeah, I did the neck opening, I think 3 times. I started on the yoke, and then I learned about German short rows. I had heard that a lot of people knit their first sweater without German short rows. However, a lot of people who were more experienced in knitting were saying that if you want to learn one thing as a beginner that really improves your sweaters, it should be German short rows. So I frogged back, I learned how to do German short rows, which was actually really difficult in the sweater. because of the stripes. The stripes are very small, so they're all 1, 2, or 3 rounds wide, and that meant that the short rows were very difficult to hide. As far as I've seen, most or all sweater patterns I could find that were irregular in construction and had German short rows, they have a big stripe up here and then start the stripe pattern further down. So you don't run into this problem where you have to hide the German short rows in the stripes. So what I did was that I have some stripes in here that are just 1 round in the front, but 3 rounds in the back of where the short row is. And then they kind of get smaller around here, and then are just 1 round in the front. I'm actually very happy with that because I couldn't find any tutorial on how to do that, or anybody who had a pattern or had been talking about how they would hide German short rows in such small stripes. So I kind of figured this out all by myself, and I think it's not very noticeable actually, so I'm very glad with how that worked out. Then I finished the yoke, I separated for sleeves. I had knit the yoke way too long, which I later realized, and I frogged it back again. I did the body, I did the sleeve. My first sleeve I actually did without decreases because I thought I wanted to have a bit of a wider sleeve that cinches in right here at the cuff. However, I had not seen coming how large that sleeve would actually look. So I did 1 sleeve twice, the other one luckily only had to knit once. I also learned how to do jogless stripes for this, which I later found out is actually quite hard to do with such small stripes. So usually if you have a bit of a wider stripe, you can easily hide where the jog is, but since my stripes are so small, I was struggling a little bit with that, and it looked fine for most of the sweater, but there were definitely some parts where you could see where I've changed colors. And when I was finished with the garment, I went back and pulled some yarn through from the inside and tied some parts together. The inside of this looks horrendous as well because I did not weave in any ends. I cut the yarn every time I changed a color, which, as you can see, happened quite often. And I was not going to weave in any of those ends. So, okay, I weaved in some of the ends, like right at the cuff or at the ribbing, but in the middle of the sweater, I just tied knots and cut everything short. I decided that this was not the project to practice weaving in ends on. For the outcome, I'm very pleased with it so far. I finally managed to finish the sweater this week after working on it a little bit last year and then putting it aside for Christmas and picking it up here and there and learning new techniques, learning how to knit better and going back and improving. I left the body as well as the sleeves a bit short. They're not too short, they're just a little shorter than I would like them to be for blocking, because I was afraid that my sweater would grow so much that it would be uncomfortably large. And I blocked it and it didn't grow at all, which I don't know, it might be because of the polyamide in the yarn, I guess. Yeah, but it stayed the same size. If anything, I feel like it got a little smaller. So for my preference, I would like the body and the sleeves to be a little bit longer. I also tried to do an Italian bind-off, which I looked at a tutorial for how to do it in 2x2 ribbing, and I'm pretty confident I did what the tutorial said, but it's just not stretchy at all. So the sleeves and the ribbing at the bottom are very tight where I bound off, and I don't love that. Another thing I'm not that pleased with is my yarn choice. I am not incredibly unhappy with it because it's a very cute yarn. I really like the colors that I chose, and I'm also quite happy that I didn't have to work with more than 1 strand at a time for my first sweater, because this yarn, it's warm but it's also fluffy, so I didn't have to pair a merino with a mohair, for example. I just used 1 strand and it was all good. But it is a little bit itchy around my neck, so if I were to use this again for a sweater, I would probably choose something that doesn't come quite as high up, but it's not so itchy that I wouldn't wear it. And in general, I would say that I would wear this item. It's not something that I would say I couldn't ever put on. I also already wore this a couple of times. However, I have decided to go back and make it a little bit longer and redo the bind off, because I think that that would greatly improve my experience with this sweater. As I mentioned in the beginning, the ribbing is quite hard to frog, so I don't think I can frog the body and or the hem of the body and the cuffs. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out how to do sweater surgery and cut the ribbing out, add some more rows in length, and then knit the ribbing again, and have a different bind off method that I'm going to have to figure out. So if you have any tips for how to do that in 2x2 ribbing, you can let me know. And I'm thinking about maybe doing a split hem instead of just connecting it like I did right now. I think that would also look really cute with the sweater, and I think it might make it look a little more polished, because this has a very like sporty sweater kind of cut, and I would prefer if it looked a little more, not sophisticated, but you know, a little more formal than it does right now. So maybe I could wear it at work. And yeah, that's my plan for this sweater for now. I'm still very, very proud that I finished it and that I managed to do all of the construction by myself, and I learned so many new techniques from the sweater. I think it's a really cool garment, and I think that regardless of whether I make it longer or not, I will still wear it, even though I think if I just leave it like that, it wouldn't become one of my favorite items, and I think it has the potential to be. So I'm gonna go back and work on it a little more, but since I have enough yarn for that left over, I think I'll, in some weeks, once I've totally finished this, we'll have a really good time with this sweater. My second finished object is this scarf that has also been on my needles for so many months, because this is actually the first ever knitted item I casted on. As I said, I've been crocheting for a long time and then decided I want to learn how to knit. I did some swatches at first and then kind of abandoned it again for a while. And then when I was ready to come back to it, I decided to make a scarf, because that's just the most beginner-friendly project. And I went to my local yarn store and I bought 4 balls of lana, grossa, cool big in the colors 1019, which is the blue-gray lighter color here, and the color 1655, which is the dark blue. It is 100% merino yarn, and I knit it on 4mm needles, and it is made out of 2 panels of stockinette stitch worked flat that I seamed together on the sides with crochet. This scarf has also had a lot of trial and error involved in it. It's actually kind of fun that I finished my first knitting projects this week, both of them after working on them for so long and also knitting so many other things in between when I had cast those aside. Well, the first problem with the scarf was that I was trying to figure out how to knit, so I started over like naturally very many times because I dropped a stitch and I didn't know how to get it back and things like that. I was also following a YouTube tutorial on how to knit a scarf, but it was a garter stitch scarf, which I realized some rows in, and I was very unhappy with that because when I started knitting I really wanted this stockinette fabric, and I was a bit disappointed that I was not getting that outcome. So I started over once again. I learned how to do stockinette, and I started knitting on this stockinette panel, but it is quite repetitive. It's just stockinette, so I kind of never had this as a first priority. I used this as like a trial and then cast it on hats and other items and gift knits and things that I finished long before I ever came back to this. So this, for the last few months, has been my travel project, just since it was relatively small and I could just put it in a little bag and take with me. So I knit on the train and in the plane and wherever. That means that you can definitely see the differences in skill level that I had while working on this. The beginning, the tension is just very tight, and you can see that I sometimes twisted a stitch and, you know, little problems like that. While at the end, or the last few stripes, are actually knit this week, so I am now very confident in my knitting abilities, and you can see that I just knew better what I was doing. So I decided to knit 2 panels and seam them together because, as I said, I wanted that stockinette look, but after I had finished the first panel, I realized that when you put the scarf on, you could kind of see the backside of it because it's a scarf and it moves on your body and you can't necessarily keep it laying flat on you. And the backside of the scarf was just not looking very pretty. And since I had a lot of yarn left over, I decided to just knit the entire scarf again and then seam it together with the panel I already had. So it turned out to be quite a lengthy project, even though it was supposed to just be a small thing to start out. I used a crochet hook to seam the panels together in the end, and I did that with a 3.5mm hook because while I knit the knitted part in 4mm needles, I was playing a little bit of yarn chicken by the end, so I have more left over of the grayish blue, but of the dark blue I have like a tiny little bit, few grams left over, so I'm quite glad with my decision to go for the 3.5mm needles for the hook. And I did single crochets all along the length of the scarf, and the short sides I seamed together with a slip stitch. So the scarf turned out a little heavier than I anticipated it turning out when I started it, because I was expecting it to just be one panel, but now it's double-sided. But it's still wearable and usable for the intended purpose. The yarn, I bought it when I really didn't know a lot about yarn. I just kind of went to a yarn store and picked out whichever colors I liked or whichever thickness of yarn I found suitable. I didn't really know about the different types of yarns and what qualities they had. So I'm actually quite glad that I just randomly happened to pick out a superwash merino for a scarf, which is certainly not a bad choice. If I were to knit this again, I would probably pair it with a mohair or something to make it a little more fluffy. But in retrospect, I don't mind the yarn choice, and I also don't really mind that you can see in some spots that I was a beginner and that my tension is a little uneven or very tight. I think it's not necessarily noticeable with a scarf, and I'm kind of glad to be done with this because it wasn't the most entertaining project to work on, because once I figured out how to knit, it was just stripes and stockinette, and since this is I think only 22 centimeters wide, I had to turn my work every couple of seconds, so it was more turning than knitting at some point. So yeah, I'm glad I have this now, even though the winter is already ending and I probably won't get that many chances to wear it this year, or at least not until the autumn. Yeah, but I'm still happy that I finished 2 of my long whips this week, because I'm quite a monogamous maker. It really stresses me out to have so many whips, and I think I had 4 previously, which is very normal or even very little for some people, but it just always puts clutter in the back of my mind. And I feel like I can never make any significant progress on anything if I have that many items I'm working on. So ideally I think I would like to have 2, which I have 2 whips right now. Like a big one I can work on at home, and the smaller one I can just pack for traveling or when I want something easy I don't have to think about. So that's kind of my situation right now, and I'm gonna show you what I'm working on. So my most recent cast on is this self-drafted mesh top that I'm working on. I want to wear this over long sleeve shirts to kind of make a cool outfit out of it, and I think it might also be fun to wear in the summer when you have these tiny tank tops and kind of want something to cover it up, or maybe even as a swimsuit cover up. It's gonna be a drop shoulder construction, and I'm using this red crochet thread to work on it. I have crazy amounts of crochet thread because my grandma recently gifted me all of her crocheting and knitting supplies. She used to do both when she was younger, but now with her age and her hands, it's become difficult for her and she doesn't really use them anymore, so she was so nice to gift all of them to me. So now I have a ton of knitting needles, some crochet hooks, and also some yarn, but mainly she had crazy amounts of this crochet thread in all kinds of colors. Probably more than I can use up in a lifetime. I could make 100 doilies and still not be done with it. So I'm kind of glad I found a project that's kind of unusual for crochet thread, I guess, that I can use this on. This is most of the back panel at this point. It's kind of difficult to show. It's just a rectangle. It doesn't look like a rectangle, it kind of collapses in on itself, but it will be a rectangle. And I'm now at the point where I have to start the neck shaping, so I'm gonna cast some stitches off in the middle and then do decreases here and here. And then I'm gonna cast off and do the front panel in a similar way, and then later I can attach them at the shoulder seam, and I'm gonna knit both sleeves in the round, I guess, because that would probably be easier. For now, I've been enjoying working on this because it's knitting up very quick. I'm using 8mm needles, so that's truly a big needle, and I don't need a lot of time to do a rectangle like this. It is a little hard to work with fabric-wise because the thread is obviously very tiny and it's not made to be knit with needles like that. So the stitches just keep sliding off of my needles, and since the yarn is just slippery, it doesn't stick to each other and the stitch unravels basically all the way down. So many times I've had to go back with a crochet hook and fix my stitch, put it back on the needle. That also has caused some of the spots to be a little tighter than others. I don't know if you can see it very well, but yeah, you can definitely see that there are some gaps in there, like some parts where there's more of a hole in the fabric. And it's not a mistake, it's just when you pull on one stitch, it like accumulates a lot of the thread in that place and takes it away from others. But I found that as I continue knitting, it kind of evens itself out, so the lower parts of it actually look very, not very even as you would want a mesh top to look. I'm not sure if I'm playing yarn chicken with this, because I can already see the paper roll that's inside of this through the thread, but also you really underestimate how little of this you need. So I'm not sure if I have enough of this red specifically. I have many more rolls of crochet thread. I just don't think I have any more of this specific red. Also, everything my grandma gave me was entirely unlabeled. So I don't know how much this is. I don't know what this color is or what this brand is or how thick it is. I have no idea. So I'm hoping that it will be enough to at least do the front panel as well. And then I have some different tones of pink that I could use to do the arms in if I run out of it, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, and I think this will be my main project for now. Since I'm also drafting it myself, I have invested quite a bit of time in figuring out how many stitches I need and how to construct it. So I'm having a lot of fun with this so far, and I think the most difficult part is pretty much done. I have measurements and stitch counts for everything, and my biggest panel is almost done, and the front panel will just be the same thing mostly. I think the arms I can figure out, that won't be too hard. So the most difficult part of this is over, and I think this will be a really cool item even for the summer. And if you have any sort of idea what I could do with insane amounts of this, then please let me know. This is another item I've had on my needles for quite a while. These are the favorite socks by Kristin, lehrer. I followed the YouTube tutorial to make this, but she also has a free pattern, I believe. And I can't really speak for the pattern because I haven't looked into it, but the tutorial is very in-depth, really explains everything to you, and it is very long, but she really holds your hand through it. And I had never knit a sock before this, and I was able to very easily figure it out. So it's a very cool tutorial that I can definitely recommend. It's just a basic sock with a heel flap and gusset, and the yarn I'm using is called Annell Super Extra. It's 75% wool and 25% polyamide, and I bought this on a trip I took to Tilburg in the Netherlands, and that was the first time I was taking a trip while I was knitting, so I thought it would be cool to bring some yarn and maybe make some accessory or some socks out of it. As a keepsake, I'm knitting this on 3mm needles, and I have one sock done, as you can see, and then I was immediately struck by second sock syndrome. But I've recently managed to at least cast on and knit a little bit of the second sock. I will say that this sock did not turn out perfectly because of a mix of my inexperience and my knitting needles that I was using. I knit this using the magic loop method, and I'm not sure how well you can see it on camera, but there's definitely like a line where I was doing the magic loop. It's more noticeable even where the heel goes later. The problem was that I was using very cheap Amazon interchangeable knitting needles, and they kept unscrewing themselves a little bit. So the yarn kept getting caught in the place where you screw the needle to a cable. And also the cable is very thick and not very flexible, so whenever I had or I was knitting on it, the other side of the cable was pulling the stitches apart a lot. I've now switched to a different needle, that one of the ones I got from my grandma, and the cable here is a lot more flexible, and so far it looks like it doesn't create this gap I was struggling with on this sock. It might just be that I'm more experienced in knitting now. Nevertheless, I must say that I'm not a big fan of the magic loop method. I find that it takes a really long time to constantly pull my cable through the stitches, and it just doesn't, it keeps me from getting into a flow with my knitting, because I always have to set it down and interrupt and pull my cable through and start over again. So it's not the most enjoyable thing for me to knit, so far at least. But that actually brings me to my latest acquisitions. So I recently figured out that there are these tiny circular needles that you can use to make small things in the round. These are 23 centimeters long, and they range in size from, I think, 2mm to 5.5mm, if I'm not mistaken. I will probably get more of these as the need arises. I just have the 3.5 and the 4mm right now, and I like using these a lot more than I like doing magic loop or traveling loop. I used these already on the cuffs of my sweater, and it is a little fiddly. It is definitely a tiny needle, and it is a little bit hard to hold it because the needle part itself is very small. But for me, it's still easier to do this than to do any kind of looping and pulling the cable through. It annoys me so much, and I feel like I always have to pay attention to not create any gaps in my knitting. So this is much easier to me. I also got these in bamboo because they also come in metal, I think, and in this wooden option, but I've never had wooden knitting needles, and I wanted to try it because a lot of people say they like knitting with wooden needles a lot. And I've also found that it's quite nice that the yarn doesn't slide off of it as quickly, and it's also just, it feels nice to hold it. I don't know if I love it though, because I'm really afraid of breaking these, which is probably stupid, but especially when a stitch is very tight and I have to push my needle through it. These are very thin and very tiny, and I'm always kind of afraid I'll break the tip of it off. It hasn't happened so far, so maybe I'm completely overthinking, but yeah, that's just been one of my worries with this. I will use this one to knit another pair of socks, which I already have yarn for and which is in my upcoming plans. So I think I'll show you my yarn next. This is sock yarn that I got in Tallinn in Estonia. It has German on it, but I bought it in Tallinn, where I recently visited, and I also lived there for half a year before. So I went back to my favorite yarn store and I picked up this to make myself another pair of socks, because I think it's just cute to have a pair of socks from everywhere where I went. This is 75% wool and 25% polyamide sock yarn, and I think the colors are really cute. There are these purple, bluish, I don't know, pinkish mix, and I'm gonna try to make the Smart Heart socks by Veronika Lindberg, because I've heard a lot of people say that that's their favorite sock pattern, and I think I would enjoy knitting socks a lot more now that I also have the small needle to do it on. So I'm gonna try that out, and I'm also gonna make the Maybe Forever sweater from her book. This is the yarn I got for that. It's the Drops Air, which is 65% alpaca, 28% polyamide and 7% wool mix. I've used this yarn before. I really like it. It's very soft but not itchy at all, and I'm aware that it's not the most ethical, but it is the recommended yarn for the sweater, and since I like it, I decided to go with this one. I got it in brown, which I'm a tiny bit worried about because it is an all-over brioche sweater, and I really want to be able to see the texture on it. I think in her example picture she's wearing it in a light grey, but all of the Drops Air colors are very, I don't want to say pastel-y, but they're very light. So even though this is brown, it is a very light brown, and I'm hoping the texture will still come through. I already gauge swatched for both of those, and I was able to meet gauge with this one exactly with the recommended needle size. For this one, I actually sized up to a 3.5mm needle, even though the pattern recommends a 2.25mm needle. So that's quite a big difference, but I think the yarn is also a little thicker than what would be recommended for the pattern. I don't think I really mind. My swatch still looked fine for a sock, I feel like, so I'm just gonna try to knit it like that and see how it turns out, and see if I want to make more of the Smart Heart socks or any kinds of socks, because for my first pair of socks right now, I don't know if I love knitting socks. It's a little tedious. I don't like the magic loop thing, and to me it's a very small reward to have a pair of socks, because you barely even see it. Maybe in summer if you were wearing it with a skirt and use it as like a statement part of your outfit, but it's just a little sad to just have a sock for all this work to me. But I think I might enjoy using the small needles a little more and also be done with it a lot quicker. So I think in that case it might work out in a way that I could enjoy knitting socks. So I'm giving it a second try, and we'll see how that goes. So that is all for today. Thank you for watching to the end, and feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more. Definitely tell me what projects I can do with crochet thread other than like doilies and dishcloth types things, because I've already done some of those and they're cool, but I don't need an endless amount. So if you have any cool projects I can do with crochet thread, you can write a comment, and I'll see you next time.